The murder of Brian Egg. Following a desperate attempt to get some police involvement in the disappearance of elderly San Francisco man Brian Egg, a grisly scene was uncovered inside his home. A fish tank was located in a hidden room. Inside it, a headless human torso. 2 individuals were promptly arrested. So, why is it that 4.5 years later, no one has been charged with the murder of Brian Egg? "65-year-old Brian Egg was a longtime San Francisco resident. He lived on Clara Street in the south of Market. There were very few people on Clara Street that didn't know Brian Egg. He purchased that property back in 1976, meaning he had lived there for almost 40 years. San Francisco had always been Brian's home. He was born in the city and grew up there, never feeling the need to move away. In the 1980s, Brian was a bartender at the famous gay bar, The Stud. Brian was a doting dog parent to his pooch Lucky, who he took on regular walks around the neighborhood. Brian was proudly himself, an eccentric man who adored his garden and even cared for other plants on the street. He was also good-hearted. Brian often invited homeless people into his home and offered them a roof over their heads, a kindness that some predatory people may have well exploited. He wasn't big on new technology. Brian didn't have a computer or even a cell phone. For someone living in 2018, this was very rare. He lived a frugal life and always counted his pennies, sometimes visiting St. Anthony's Foundation to grab a free meal. Brian had a known presence in the neighborhood, which meant it was pretty obvious when he suddenly stopped appearing. Brian Egg was last seen in either late May or early June of 2018. When his brother, Devin, hadn't heard from him in a while and wanted to check in, something strange stood out to him. When he called the landline, there was an answering machine. Brian hadn't ever set up an answering machine. That could be explained away quite easily by the possibility that someone helped him set one up, but it got stranger. The voice on the answering machine wasn't Brian's. Devin decided to call back, though it is unclear whether this was straight away or sometime later. This time, someone was on the other line, but it still wasn't Brian. A man called Nate greeted Devin and told him to call back when Brian got home from walking Lucky. Brian never called back. Neighbors started to pick up on Brian's disappearance as the days went by. He hadn't been seen in a long time, and this was quite odd. When it became late July with still no sightings of him, they began placing calls to the authorities. Officers arrived at the house on 2 occasions, knocking on the door to no answer. Without having sufficient cause to believe something was wrong, they left. On August 2nd, Scott Free, a neighbor who had previously rented a room from Brian, posted on an app called Nextdoor, which connected him with other people in the neighborhood. He wondered if others had noticed Brian's disappearance and expressed concern that something might be wrong. By this time, multiple strangers had been seen coming and going from Brian's residence, but still without any sightings of him. Remember, people coming and going from Brian's home were far from unusual. It was known that he invited strangers in all the time. 2 days later, on August 4th, Brian's sister called the police. She hadn't heard from her brother for months and could not reach him. Again, officers did what they had done before. Go to the house, knock, get no answer, and leave. But neighbors noticed something different going on after this 3rd checkup from the police. The people who were in Brian's home began frantically cleaning. The attempted cleanup was so extensive that the smell of bleach was evident from just walking past the home. Parts of the house's exterior were also painted. On August 7, 2018, Brian's sister filed a missing persons report. Still, his home wasn't searched. 9 days later, the authorities were called again. It was a neighbor who had very concerning information. There appeared to be a crime scene cleanup vehicle parked outside the home. This was enough to kick the police into action. They had to wait a day to get a search warrant, but then they could enter the home. Inside, they found 52-year-old Robert McCaffrey. He was arrested. Robert was in possession of $1,000 that was allegedly going to be used to pay the cleanup crew. On August 16th, 2 days after police first entered the home, a second man was arrested. 39-year-old Lance Silva had been staying in a nearby residential home. Both men were charged with financial crimes, identity theft, and homicide. They had used Brian's credit cards for multiple purchases, including a car bought in early June. 4 days after that initial search, a horrific discovery was made. In a storage room under the stairs, hidden away, was a fish tank filled with some sort of chemical believed to possibly be Drano. Floating inside those chemicals was the headless torso of a man. His hands were also missing. It was truly like something out of a horror movie. DNA testing would confirm that this was Brian Egg's body. The tank was found behind the door, which a picture had blocked, hence why it was not yet searched. It seemed fairly obvious who the culprits were, but the charges against Silva and McCaffrey were never filed in court. Silva remained behind bars on a parole violation, but McCaffrey was released. Scot-free even saw him walking in the neighborhood following his arrest. Silva was later released, information that was not passed on to Brian's brother. "I'm very angry about this. I got no notice," he said. There were obviously many questions about why the charges hadn't stuck on these two men. The San Francisco District Attorney's Office said insufficient information was available for charges to be filed against the men. Naturally, they have also been heavily criticized for their inaction until so late in the case. Neighbors were clearly concerned and expressed that this was not usual behavior for Brian. Had they made an effort to get a search warrant earlier, more evidence might have been available to aid in bringing charges against the suspects. Speaking to his neighbor, Scott said, "We all missed him. He was entertaining to talk to. He was sort of an eccentric, but he had a kind heart." In August 2019, 1 year after the initial arrests, the San Francisco Police Department told ABC7 that the investigation was ongoing and that they were following good leads and are confident we will make an arrest. In August of this year, it will be 5 years since Brian was murdered. As the years go by, the chance of Brian Egg's killer or killers being brought to justice decreases. Unless a confession is made or his hands or head is located, there seems like little new information could be strong enough to prosecute the guilty parties. Brian may not have been like everyone else, but he made sure to help out others in any way he could. He was a pleasant, eccentric man who was just living his life before it was brutally taken from him. The San Francisco Police Department has urged anyone who has information about the case to reach out to them at +1 415 553 0123. If you liked this video, please check out our other videos. Also, do not forget to subscribe so you won't miss another one.